will convene the, what month are we in? July meeting of the Housing and Community Development Committee. We have a fairly light agenda today, and so we're just going to dive in. Is there a motion to approve the minutes or any changes to that?
Motion to approve the minutes.
Second.
All right, the minutes are approved. Community Development Manager update. This is a written report that we get that is on the website. Does anybody have any questions about anything on the update?
I wanted to ask for some clarity about Opportunity Zone Fund.
Sure. So right now, with opportunity zones and the legislation, the second amount of regs dropped probably about 6 weeks ago to further iron out some of the details about the opportunity zones and the legislation regarding opportunity funds and people creating them to take advantage of this tax incentive. There are folks locally as well as nationally, regionally, setting up funds. There has been some discussion about setting up some funds locally that could be used for public projects, but no fund that the city is setting up at this time, although it may be a possibility. But there should be another round of regulations dropping, I think, within the next month or two that we'll see some further clarification.
And maybe I can add a little bit to that. So I've referenced a couple times this conference that I attended about a month ago, a little over a month ago, where I learned a lot about opportunity zones. And my conclusion about this is that they can either be they can be a vehicle for real investment in low-income communities, or they can be a vehicle that just advances gentrification and displacement. And I think the law itself is not tight enough to prevent that last thing from happening. So I got worried about that, and so what I have done, I've actually scheduled this meeting for, I think it's next week. I'm pulling together a number of folks in the community who I'll just say are on the money side, on the investment side, to talk about this idea of creating some local funds that would invest in local projects and would be, essentially those people would need to be willing to take a pretty low rate of return. They would still get an enormous investment from an enormous benefit from the law, but willing to take a lower return. I think a lot of the investors who are taking advantage of opportunity zones are both wanting their cake and eating it too. So they want the capital gains tax benefit and they want a big return on the project, and that's not what we need here. So I'm having that first meeting with the people, some of the people who would be on that investor side, and if we can get a sense from them that yes, this is the way we want it to work in Asheville, then I think the next conversation will be with people the organizations that could be teeing up projects. I mean, we already have plenty of projects that need that kind of investment. So and if we are able to do this, we will be the first city in the country that is able to sort of corral those local funds and make sure that they're working for the benefit of the neighborhoods here. So, yeah. Anything else? Any other questions on the manager's update? And Paul, anything that you need to add from when you prepared this? Okay.
No, we're good. Just let us know if the length is getting up there. I'm trying to keep it to 3 pages, but just to keep you all informed about the activities. We've got some reports coming up, but all that'll be in there.
Okay, great. All right, so then moving on. So voucher incentives for homeowners and ADUs. I'm probably going to be talking about this conference for the next year. So again, this is a conversation that came out of this conference where there was a lot of conversation about how do we make affordable housing more available, how do we reduce the cost of building affordable housing, and Kate Pett was at this conference with me, and we had lots of time to talk and brainstorm about things. So she brought an idea to me that I wanted to bring to the committee, and my hope is that we will sort of send this idea to AHAC for them to kind of chew on a little bit. But I wanted you guys to hear it too, because I think it's great and it's very different than anything that we've done before. So Kate, let me invite you and David Nash to the podium to tell us your idea.
Shall I go first?
You wanna go
I hate
first?
to jump on you, but I need to get out of here quickly.
Go first.
Apologies. David Nash, Asheville Housing Authority. Kate is a wonderful community partner. We've worked with her in different settings for quite a while, but she was also one of she and her husband are one of the landlords that helped to relocate a family from Lee Walker Heights. So they went through our process of leasing up under the Housing Choice Voucher Program. And they've given us a lot of good feedback on how our internal processes work, but she's also introduced this idea of a broader community outreach for more landlords to participate in the program and lease to our participants. The federal government works in mysterious ways, and for whatever reason this year we found out 7 months into the fiscal year that we were getting a $3 million increase in our housing assistance payments funds,
Great.
which don't support us administratively and must go exclusively to paying landlords and utility bills.
That's
And
a
we
high-quality
have.
problem. That's a high-quality problem.
It's a high-quality problem. It's a great problem to have. With lease-up rates that we've had recently, it's a big challenge for us to use that. It could support between 300 and 400 new voucher participants in the tenant-based program, so not in our project-based units, but in the tenant-based program. And we are in the process of hiring. Hopefully, we'll have a new staff member on board by the 1st of August to work with Michelle Moore and Tara Irby, who both worked with Kate on that particular placement and who will be working on our outreach efforts broadly in the community. So it was very timely for us that Kate came to us and said, how about this partnership? And with that, I will step back and turn it over to her.
And David does have to leave early, but we can, if we continue this conversation after he leaves, we can call on you all for some help and assistance. Okay, great.
Good morning. My name is Kate Pett. I haven't met everyone here, but it's nice to see everyone. I'm here this morning both as the director of Thrive Asheville and as a landlord, as David mentioned, in the Choice Voucher Program. And from these two vantage points, I see an opportunity to encourage more landlords to be a part of the solution to our lack of affordable housing by participating in the Choice Voucher opportunity that David mentioned now has greatly expanded. I wanted to quickly just mention what Thrive Asheville is, which is it is a civic infrastructure initiative led by a group of citizens in Asheville. This group cares deeply about sustainability, affordability, and inclusivity. And we're committed to using collaboration as a strategy for addressing some of these pressing problems and building an advocacy network to support and create excitement in the community for improved policies and practices to address these problems. So with that in mind, Thrive is interested in using our networks to convene landlords and to learn about their experiences with the Housing Authority and their needs for participation in the voucher program. I think my experience, I'll just back up to say that as David mentioned last summer, my husband and I went to the Housing Authority and said, wow, we would love to do this, and here are our concerns. And they did such an amazing job of kind of acting like a matchmaker. And we feel really fortunate to have a fantastic family that we're really partnering with to be in this home. And I think there's a great deal of potential to try and create this kind of public-private partnership where we can reach out to landlords and encourage them to participate. So Thrive would be interested in convening landlords and learning about their experiences, and we would also be interested in developing new tools for communication about a potential collaboration between the city, the Housing Authority, and Thrive. we'd like to think outside the box of how we communicate with landlords and make it feel personal and solution-oriented, and really make us a call for civic action for landlords to be part of the solution. I mentioned to Julie on the trip that we enjoyed together that one of the challenges for some landlords is that the voucher program does not fully cover a market rate. And so for some landlords, there is a financial cost to participating. I asked her, and I had a conversation with Mr. D'Angelo, I think a week or so ago, and mentioned that my question for the city is, are there incentives that the city can provide, financial incentives perhaps through tax credits, or other types of incentives that would cover that gap in cost? I've been talking to the Housing Authority about how can they package sort of their benefits and supports that they can provide to landlords, and my question to the city is, how can the city also participate so that we together as three entities could really launch a program of supports for landlords that would reduce their risk and make this really a feasible option for all landlords in Asheville. That's my question.
Yeah, and so just to maybe ask some clarifying questions. So the city, as far as I know, we don't have really any incentives for existing housing in terms of making it affordable or turning it affordable, like in terms of property tax grant, Luigi or anything like that. Like, we don't have that.
Not currently.
We have incentives for new construction, but we don't really have anything to incentivize existing landlords to make their units available for affordable housing. So.
That's correct, although with the Luigi update that is working its way through, we did add points for the property tax abatement for developers to accept vouchers. I think it was 5% of the total number of units that we gave points there. So that's a first step into that type of incentive, as well as we talk quite often with HACA about the vouchers that are stirring on the street that need to find a home with a family. So we have the conversations, but that was our first step in a incentive.
But the whole Luigi program is still aimed at new construction.
For the most part, yes.
For the most part, yeah. So I think, Kate, what you're talking about is working with existing landlords, both single family and presumably multifamily, to somehow, can we put some of the tools that we have that are now aimed at new construction toward existing rental properties, either through some sort of property tax rebate or grant similar to Luigi or something else.
Exactly. Some of the barriers for landlords to using the voucher program is that tenants in housing traditionally have not had access to a security deposit, for instance, which is something that most landlords need. But that's something that David and his team have now made available, so tenants can, and the city. You can come up here and help me with this. So having a security deposit is a key opportunity that would help this be more accessible for landlords. And David has also talked to me about having a damage mitigation fund so that landlords can feel assured that one of the challenges, of course, their concerns might be that there might be damage. And so there's a possibility of having access to those funds. So what I'm hoping we can do is kind of think about what are the risks to landlords, this lack of security deposit, potential damage, and also then unmet costs because of not being able to meet the market rate. And so if we can put something together and really package these and then communicate them in a way that really feels like citizen to citizen, I think my hope is we could excite some landlords about participating.
Questions?
What kind of gap are we talking about from the Housing Choice vouchers as far as financial gap to the tenant and, to the landlord?
It's a little bit of a hard question to answer, but I'll try to give you the short and then a little bit of the longer answer. The fair market rents are established by HUD nationwide on a community-by-community basis, and they're based on the 40th percentile of market rents in Asheville's case. It's the metropolitan statistical area, including Asheville, including Buncombe County, Madison County, and Henderson County. So first of all, that measure is on the lower end of 50%, and it's spread across those 3 counties. So it doesn't really get up to Asheville's true market rents right now, except for older housing and, frankly, trailer parks.
What's an average market rate for a two-bedroom?
I think 2-bedroom now on market rate is somewhere around $1,200 a month, plus utilities, and we're trying to get to the point where we're close to that, but it'll have to include utilities. So the other thing that we're doing is our own across-the-board rent study. We paid a firm out of Maryland to do a rent study, and their results should be back soon, in hopes of getting those fair market rents increased, because the fair market rents impact the homeless programs, they impact the VASH program, and they impact our Housing Choice Voucher program. So and again, thank you to the city and to the Home Consortium for providing funding for security deposits and utility deposits. That's been very helpful to us. It ran out about 9 months ago, and I'm not sure it's quite back up and running again. So, trying to keep those funds flowing would be helpful to this process. And we do have some internal reserve funds that we're setting aside for mitigation fund in case there's severe damage that a landlord experiences. But the bottom line of that is, even with a regular subsidy that we're paying for a low-income person, we have some bureaucratic steps that we have to go through. We have to do an inspection. So not every landlord is willing to go through all of those steps to work with us when they can just rent to a group of 3 roommates or a family and just have a one-to-one relationship. So that's the fundamental challenge, and I think Kate's idea of possibly tax abatement of some kind could be very helpful to that.
I will say this, just for clarity, these are the same housing choice vouchers that you could use for home ownership, right?
Correct.
Correct. I think it's a good step forward to try to explore something like this. I would say on the same hand, though, I still have a personal affinity for home ownership that allows individuals to build generational wealth in their own families. Landlords are still getting paid, and that money goes in their pocket. It does good for them. It also does a good deed for the family, so they'll have somewhere to stay. But we just had a project in 360 Hilliard that you all didn't have anything to do with that came through that was going to be, prior to its newest incarnation, was going to be home ownership using housing choice vouchers for some individuals in that property. And I would still like to see the same energy that we may be looking at doing with this with home ownership. I would hate to have that fall by the wayside and continue to put our energy into rental. Not saying that it's not a good step forward, but I would like to see an equal step of energies put behind home ownership opportunities. The problems that you all have seen with folks being able to use housing choice vouchers is not new to me, and of course I don't work with David or formerly Gene Bell over the Housing Authority, but those problems and situations for individuals who hold housing choice vouchers are better known as Section 8 sometimes or whatever. Those stories come to me frequently from people that I know that do have them and they can't use them because the landlords, and this is just an opinion, sometimes the folks who carry these housing choice vouchers are looked at a little bit differently than other tenants. And so sometimes when you talk about landlords not wanting to jump through hoops, I think that may be a cop-out sometimes. I think it's just the individuals that are being served. That's my personal opinion. But I think it's nothing new. I've been knowing about this for a while as people having trouble getting people to take these housing choice vouchers. But I would say it is a good step. I would be willing to explore it with hopefully everyone else up here. But I would say to staff to equally explore future opportunities of using housing choice vouchers for home ownership programs, especially since we had one in the pipeline that got changed. And that is, I would really hate to see our energy shift and move more toward the rental and not equally explore both these opportunities.
Two quick responses. We will not let up on homeownership. That is one of our active programs. I think we're up to 61 active voucher-supported homeowners right now, which is up from 50 about a year ago. Not a huge number, but it's still steady progress.
Is Shonda still running that program?
Yes, she is.
Well, you all are doing a really good job on that. I don't think we as a city are doing a pretty accurate job on trying to figure out how to make these things work for us as far as with other developers coming in. I commend what your organization is doing with that program, and Shonda does a really great job. I would like to see us take a more active role in trying to figure out how to make that work with what we do here in housing community development and try to make that work, but you all do a great job.
Thank you. The other thing is that this outreach effort will be, right now, first and foremost, get people leased up, but it will also have a racial equity focus and an affirmatively furthering fair housing focus of trying to open up opportunities for people of color in neighborhoods of opportunity, so low poverty census tracts, that if they make the choice to move there. So those will be part of the goals of what we're working on here.
Yeah, I think we're just talking about expanding the pie of landlords who would be looking at new tools to expand that pie.
Right.
And before Kate comes back up, give me just 1 second. I would say this before it slips my mind. Probably a couple of meetings ago, I had asked that we explore what opportunities the city has to become its own developer. And with doing that, one of the problems that you all have mentioned about there's a gap to accepting market rate. Well, part of that is there has to be a profit for the landlord.
Right.
For the city, there wouldn't have to be a profit other than covering what the loan amount was or whatever the cost of construction was and upkeep. So that kind of, in my mind, segues to city doesn't have to make a serious profit on developing affordable housing, whether it be rental or whatever, if we do it on our own. So I'm still waiting to hear what's coming back from that.
That's going to be part of the workshop that we have.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
I need to step out if that's okay.
Yeah.
Sarah and Michelle are here if you have any questions.
Thanks.
Thank you for those comments. And the last point that you made was an issue that we sort of touched on when we were talking, which is how do we use scarce funds to ensure that this benefits residents the most? And so one idea in thinking about it is that this doesn't necessarily have to create profit for landlords. It could just cover their expenses. So even though, just using my personal example, we have owned this house for a very long time, so the mortgage is small, so for us, we wouldn't need this type of tax incentive. But I wonder if one of the processes that we could look at is actually asking landlords to do some type of analysis so that we're not just taking these tax abatements and necessarily increasing landlord profit, but actually just filling kind of bona fide gaps. So that might be one layer that we build into this, which is an analysis of direct costs of landlords to make sure. My other thought is that, and I don't understand the intricacies of this. I'm the first person to say that I'm just getting into this and learning about these things, but my hope is that actually this might draw from similar funds where you're currently giving them to new construction, and I don't know if that's true or not, but my point to Julie was that first of all, we know that we have a housing crisis. And secondly, this seems like a pretty low cost per unit based on a city investment relative to what the city is currently making for new construction. So it seems like a good return on investment versus trying to continue to direct some of these funds to new housing. But I completely agree with you and would love to think about how Thrive could support HACA's other programs and the city's programs in terms of actually helping get people to home ownership.
So I guess what I want to recommend want to ask is, how does the committee feel about sort of sending this issue to AHAC for them to chew on a little bit and maybe come back with a policy recommendation on creating incentives for existing landlords particularly around vouchers.
I would be in full support of that because I think a lot of the conversations around AHAC has been how do we get more community solutions, community-based solutions. And I think this is a great example And I think it's commendable for you to take the lead on it. I would say that even you wanting to put forth an analysis so that there is trust-based, it's a trust-based type of program and not a person receiving a profit. I think that is to really be centered in this conversation because it's philanthropic, you know, and that is what AHAC has really been talking about. So.
Yeah. Paul, did you want to add something?
Sure. So I did want to, just from a staff perspective, and Kate and I spoke about a few of these things when we spoke a week or two ago. We have discussed Luigi possibly being used to assist the voucher payment with some kind of tax grant back to the landlord, especially in higher income census tracts where there's more opportunities. We've looked at that could be the incentive to try to, instead of them usually being concentrated in the same areas, to look at possibly looking for a higher income census tract. So we have had this discussion, so I think it'd be, when it comes back to AHAC, there has been some talk already around that, so that would be great. And I did, the partnership with the Housing Authority is great. Michelle and I speak pretty often, and we did look about a year ago if there was any way to layer city funds with the voucher payment that's out there to get a little bit closer to market rate, but there's barriers to laying funds with that HUD, those HUD dollars, which is why we came up with the Luigi possibility. And one other thing we did regarding the vouchers, and Michelle and I have talked about this, is the Appendix 1, which talks about the rate, the rents for the 80 and the 60% AMI. We added in the voucher rents as well, which shows that if a developer does agree to do 60% AMI rents, actually taking a voucher is more beneficial to their balance sheet because it actually offers higher than just the straight 60%. So we've tried in partnership to see how we can help incentivize those vouchers to be moved more in the community. And I think bringing it back to AHAC, they're prepped for some of this, so I think it'll be very good.
Great.
Just want to let you know where we were from a staff basis.
That's great.
I would be supportive of it. I would be supportive of it with one caveat. And I've said it time and time again, so I'm gonna keep beating that drum. It is really important that we understand what is the benefits of raising generational wealth through home ownership. And if this goes to the Affordable Housing Committee, I would not want it to be strictly top heavy on specifically rental. If we're going to send this to them and ask them to spend time trying to explore how to make this work and come up with ideas, I equally want them to come up with ideas on how to do housing choice vouchers through home ownership, because in my mind it feels like it's getting pushed to the background, and that is a conversation that I have made clear to members of staff that is a focus. We've changed the way that our goals are laid out to equally prioritize that, and I do not want it to get lost by the wayside. Generational wealth for these types of families are huge. Being able to access equity in a home is huge. Being able to pass on a home to your children is huge. And for those of us in Asheville who have that opportunity, we possibly may take it for granted. For those folks who are still trying, and we have the opportunity to give them that, we need to allow them that same opportunity. So when this goes to that committee, when it's being explained to them, when it's being told to them, I would hate for them not to explore the other opportunities of homeownership. I would not like this coming back to us with any sort of, with nothing on homeownership.
Well, is that something that Thrive would be interested in exploring, rent to own?
Absolutely. And I need to learn a lot about the intricacies of that, but I already had a conversation with somebody about how could we, and this, I'm just not even going to say anything right now. Yes. Yes, and yes to everything that Keith is saying about how important it is that we support homeownership. So yes to both of those things.
Well, again, thank you for stepping up.
Well, and before you step away, if we're talking about asking AHAC to look at incentives, I want to put something else on the table that, again, we learned about at the conference, which is, so several years ago, is that all right that I'm raising?
No, I just did actually remember another point about that connects renting to homeownership.
Well, why don't you say that first?
Well, I apologize. This feels all out of order. I forgot to say this one thing. So something that we could consider looking at as part of this is there are plenty of examples across the country of programs like this where actually for every month of successful renting, there is a small amount of money that's put in a savings account for the families who are in those types of programs. And it's a whole nother layer, but it's something that I think that we could really think outside the box about how can there be a savings account developed that walks along with families who are receiving vouchers and who are moving out into the community. It's another layer on top of what we've talked about, but there's examples of it around the country that could begin to help people have the types of savings that eventually could be supportive of a down payment.
Well, so let me ask, so the Housing Authority has an IDA program for people who have project-based vouchers. Can people who have the housing choice vouchers, the non-project-based vouchers, still take advantage of that IDA?
I'm not sure, but we do have a family self-sufficiency program, which has an escrow or savings account program.
That's what I'm talking about.
Yes.
Yeah, and
So both PPV and HCD are eligible.
Okay, so what it sounds like, Kate, is that we already have that structure set up. If people are using a voucher, there can still be money set aside to build that nest egg.
Thank you. That's why I shouldn't talk so much right now.
Okay. No, it's all very confusing. So again, one of the other things, so several years ago, the city, this was, I think, before any of us were here, the city council adopted new rules around to incentivize the construction of accessory dwelling units. And I think that was to increase the housing stock, not necessarily the affordable housing stock, just the housing stock to release some pressure. We're not seeing as many ADUs as we wanted to, as we hoped. And so I would also love for AHAC to have a conversation about incentives related to ADUs that would ensure that that would make those ADUs available for low-income families, voucher holders. Clearly, just saying the go build more ADUs for market rate has not worked, and so can we put some money on the table to encourage people to build ADUs for affordable housing? And Kate, I don't know if you want to mention some of the things that you heard about at the conference, but.
Well, and one of the things that I heard about at the conference was something that was actually mentioned at the AHAC meeting last week, which was this program where homeowners were offered basically free funding to build their ADU if they would agree for 5 years to provide housing for a homeless individual or family. And I think that somebody brought up that maybe that it only happened twice or something like that the program didn't really work. I think, though, the idea is a good one. That bar might have been particularly high. I looked into that a little bit. I think that was in Portland. And I think the bar of moving somebody directly out of homelessness into this situation might have been a high one. I think that we could look at some type of hybrid here that we're talking about. How could we help people have the funds to create ADUs with the agreement that they'll use vouchers? One of the things that HACA is talking about as part of this is providing a credible reference for families. The family that we're partnering with is fantastic, and I tell everybody how lucky we feel to be working with them. And but that was really because we got that reference and that story actually from Tara Irby, who helped us make that connection. And so how could we do that kind of piece to help establish ADUs and then help families get the references they need so that we know they could be successful in those settings? I think that's an important part of it.
Yeah. So, yeah, I mean, I would love for AHAC to include looking, it sounds like maybe they already are.
Right, so we started that conversation, I guess it was last week at the AHAC meeting. We had Ben Woody from Development Services as well as Vidila from Planning, and they've elevated that conversation a little bit more to understand how right now it's a little bit easier to kind of do an addition to your home. When people come in to do an ADU, it's a little bit easier just to make an addition to your home where the requirements to actually do an ADU are higher. So right now it's
separate, if it's a physically separate
right,
versus attached.
It doesn't actually have to be, which was an interesting learning experience. An ADU does not have to be, but the requirements to do the actual ADU versus kind of like an extension of your home is that actually that you can rent out. It actually is easier to do that and a little bit better financially versus doing an ADU, which is why if people walk into DSD and look to do an ADU, they end up just doing this addition where they can then rent it out because of some of the guidelines and ordinances behind doing an ADU. So everyone at the table at AHAC last month decided to continue that conversation. They made a recommendation to planning, so we are exploring it. I can share those minutes from the meeting as well as a summary if you'd like.
I just think it's great that we're having the conversation. So.
Kate, thank you for coming and sharing this idea with us. I have a really good relationship with you. I'd be more than happy to sit down with you on a sidebar and learn all I can about the program and how we can be beneficial to each other, the city and your organization and HACA. So.
Yeah, I'd like to learn more about all the visions for home ownership underway as well. Thank
Great.
you all so
Thanks,
much.
Kate. Kind of to Keith's point, and I should have asked this earlier, but so we're several months into our down payment assistance program. Are we seeing people come into that, trying to layer housing choice vouchers and other sources of funding with ours?
So we have folks lined up. We're still waiting on the final agreement with the Federal Home Loan Bank, so that's gone back and forth between legal. We want to release those funds together. We're in good, consistent contact with the bankers, realtors. We still take lots of calls. We do think, though, we have not heard back yet from the Federal Home Loan Bank with the latest round of MOU arrangements we've made, that if we don't get those shortly, then we'll go ahead and move forward with with our money. We're trying to release it the same to stay away from confusion. It has been a back and forth with legal from the Federal Reserve of Atlanta and our legal department, but they have all the final recommendations. They've agreed to it. I've not received it back yet as of this morning. As soon as that goes, I've already met with finance. We're pretty much ready to go. But again, if we don't get that back shortly from the Federal Home Loan or Federal Reserve of Atlanta, we're going to go ahead and move ahead with our $1 million of the bond money.
But you said we do have some families lined up?
We don't keep a specific list, but we're in consistent contact with the bankers who have some families that right now are looking for homes. The challenge, as we probably expected, is the home prices versus what people can qualify for. So the bankers are definitely looking at layering with the North Carolina Housing Finance Agency. MHO and Habitat might be some of the best bets out of the gate, but we're prepared and ready to go.
Great, thanks. Justin, you have something to add?
If you're accepting public comment by sections, I know sometimes we do.
We can.
Thank you.
Happy, come on up.
Would you like me to come up?
Yes, please.
Great. Thank you for letting me speak. I'm Justin Edge. I'm with Pisgah Legal Services. And I work with our Community Economic Development Project. So I just wanted to say that our team within Community Economic Development, as well as our housing team that works on landlord-tenant law, began exploring this about a year ago. It was all in follow-up to our housing summit of late 2017. So we did both some data analysis and some legal analysis around this, because I imagine there are some people at the dais up here who are thinking about just how complicated it is to combine any other source of money with vouchers. And that is actually a protection that is in place for the tenants themselves, because we actually see a lot of illegal practices around tenants asking for it, or landlords asking for additional fees in different ways to pad the amount of rent, because the program is flawed, obviously. They're just trying to meet that need. So basically, we did some landlord focus groups that we'd be really happy to share with Thrive and talk about what we found in that. I'll tell you too, you were asking about just the most basic numbers, and obviously it's a very complicated analysis, but from level C, grade C apartments from the Bowen report, the rents that they were seeing, which is basically as far down as they took their analysis, not at that 40% that David was talking about, but that's full habitability, basically. Those are not the types of cases that we end up seeing at Pisgah Legal, but they're very modest places. We were seeing basically across the board, from 1 bedroom up to 3 bedroom, about a $200 to $250 gap. And that's analysis from last year based on Bowen report numbers. So, that may have changed a little bit, but that's roughly what you're looking at to reach the lowest hanging fruit. And that's every single month, obviously. But yeah, I just wanted to say, so in considering the legal restrictions, of which there are very many, And then we actually put together several program designs of what this may look like in ways that it could be done legally, and ran those by some focus groups of landlords, and in the end had wondered about the political feasibility of it as well. But we would love to share all of this. We could work with AHEC, for instance, so that we make sure that what's coming out of their suggestions are not going to all be illegal by HUD regulations, and then we'd be happy to share things with Thrive as well. So really happy to hear this is moving forward, and yeah, we came up with many of the same concerns that you all expressed too. So happy to hear it's still happening.
Thanks, Justin.
Thank you.
We trust you to keep us legal, in addition to our own legal department.
Janice.
Yeah. Anybody else want to comment on this particular agenda item? Yeah,
I just want to ask,
just
do you have
come on up. We're on TV now, so we need you to come up. Tell us who you are. All that.
I'm Margie Bukowski with Weaver Cook Construction. Could you share with us the actual conference that you went to,
Oh, sure.
where it was located?
Yes.
And some of the general topics that,
Yeah.
that you covered?
Yeah, sure. So this was the Congress for the New Urbanism, which is the way I describe it. These are the cutting edge smart growth people. These are the people who kind of created smart growth and the concept of new urbanism and dense, walkable communities. And there is now a tremendous focus of this, and this is an annual conference. This year it happened to be in Louisville. Last year it was in Savannah. The year before that it was in Seattle. It happens every year. This year we actually had a nice little team from Asheville. We had a city staff person. We had myself. We had Kate, and then a couple of other sort of nonprofit folks who work in this field. So a lot of it's not enough to talk about building dense walkable communities, right? That's not getting at the problem. And so there is a significant overlay to many of the sessions around affordability, equity, just dealing, how can cities and developers deal with the challenges that continue to unfold around creating good, affordable, sustainable communies.
Is Portland a benchmark city that we should be looking at or not?
Different cities are doing different things really well. Portland had this particular idea around paying for people to build ADUs, but apparently that didn't really work. So, it's
No one bright shining star.
yeah, no. It's the answer is still silver buckshot. So
Okay.
as far
Thanks.
as I can tell. Yeah, I would just encourage, anyone who, I'm sure there are lots of conferences that deal with affordability. I find this one to be particularly compelling, so. Okay, any other public comment? All right, great. That conference next year is going to be in Minneapolis, St. Paul, I think in May. All right, so moving on to new business. Amaranth?
So everyone should have a staff report in front of them regarding the Amaranth Apartment, where there's a recommendation. We're looking for a recommendation in support of an increased award of Housing Trust Fund dollars to the Amaranth Apartments. Paul D'Angelo, Community Development Department, and the developer also is here. Jim Yasmin is here as well for questions. But to briefly go through some highlights of this staff report, right now this is a tax credit award from the North Carolina Housing Finance Agency to develop a 70-unit affordable housing property at 1 Brookside Circle. The project, as proposed, contains 14 one-bedroom units, 35 two-bedrooms, and 21 three-bedroom apartments. That, as a note, is good to see. A lot of our reports show the need for 1 and 2 bedrooms. Community often talks about the need for 3 bedrooms, so it's great to see tax credit development have some of these 3 bedrooms available. They're all available to folks at 60% AMI, area median income or below, and this includes 18 apartments specifically set aside for households at or below 30% AMI. The tax credits, as you know, provide equity to help develop the project, bringing about $7.6 million to the project that's applied as equity. And then to make this development happen, the developer will work with other groups like NCHFA or local dollars to try to make the numbers work to build the development. And an initial request with Jim and his team, he had come in I guess about a year ago or so, for $600,000 in a housing trust fund award from us, which we granted. But then, after he received his award, which was interesting, he was actually awarded a little late because someone had, I guess, fallen off the wheelhouse. So Amaranth was the next one in line. So he got the award to develop the 70-unit complex. And then relooking at the cost, there was a total increased value of cost of about $1.4 million, of which approximately $900,000 is related to the site issues and the development cost. And as most of you know, and I'm sure we'll talk about in the workshop as well, these increased development costs with land, materials, labor, somewhere in the range in the last 2 years of about 25 to 30% of an increase. And of course, the tariffs as well have added to that. So we are seeing these increases and seeing developers come back with additional requests. With partnership with Jim, we definitely took a look at cost to try to come up with some solutions on how to close that gap, looking at things like an affordable housing loan that might come from the Fed, or some type of deferred developer fee, other options that were out there. And working with Jim, we were able to close that gap from that $1.4 million for the city dollars at least, to only add $600,000 to the housing trust fund, which now would be a $1.2 million housing trust fund to complete this tax credit property, which is in the city of Asheville limits, which is also excellent for us to get an award in the city limits. It's been through committee, as you can see, with the council goals of quality, affordable housing, equitable, diverse community. Pros of awarding increased funding will allow the developer to complete the project and bring these 70 affordable units online in the city of Asheville. The con, of course, the increased investment uses resources from our housing trust fund dollars, which can be finite. Looking at that $600,000 award to be a $1.2 million housing trust fund award, and recommending to move this forward to City Council. And we're happy to answer any questions, myself or Jim as well.
Jim, do you want to add anything to that?
Hi, good morning. My name is Jim Yameen. And yeah, I would just highlight again the dilemma that we're in, that dilemma being an environment of really rapidly escalating construction costs. And I mean, I find that we tax credit developers have been kind of in a bind in terms of working with the Housing Finance Agency, because we've been aware of this for a number of years now, and actually have been urging the Housing Finance Agency to raise what's currently a ceiling on how much we can budget for hard construction costs in our tax credit applications. In their qualified allocation plan, which is kind of their rules and regulations for the tax credit program, like I said, they limit that number to like $78,000 a unit. And we've known from last year that at that point, costs that we were seeing coming in are $80,000, $85,000 a unit. So, we were kind of forced to a situation where we had to submit applications that we kind of knew going in were going to be short on funding, and it's I know that the finance agency wants to try to do what they can to spread their tax credits as widely as possible, and then we're kind of left with the situation of, well, we then after the fact need to try to do what we can to close our funding gap. And so this is some background to where we're at today. It's also true that, as you can, I'm sure, appreciate, there are not many remaining flat sites in Asheville, especially those that also offer convenience in terms of real close proximity to shopping and services. So that also accounts for a good chunk of additional costs that we're seeing. And these additional numbers that we're talking about are the hard final bids that we've received from subcontractors. I mean, I'm ready to close and start construction next month. So I'm really appreciative that the city is open to entertaining my request for more assistance. And if you can approve the request, then we're ready to start construction and deliver good quality, affordable units.
And these are permanently affordable?
They will be permanently affordable, yes.
Great, okay. Questions from anybody for either Paul or Jim? Nope.
I make a motion to approve the request for Workforce Homestead to borrow an additional $600,000 from the Housing Trust Fund and proceed with the item to City Council.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
Great, all right, it's approved.
Thank you.
You're very welcome. Thank you for the project. So I think this will be on our agenda for Tuesday, is that right? Excellent, great. All right, and then our final agenda item, report on homelessness. So folks will remember that Brian came to us 2 months ago to talk about the point-in-time count, and at that time he previewed that there was another report that was being finalized that would give us a fuller picture of our homelessness situation, and he is here today to do that.
Thank you. Good to see you again. Make sure this all works. Yep, we're good. Always want to be careful with the technology.
Yes.
So I'm Brian Husky. I'm Community Development Analyst in the Community Development Office. This really is a timely opportunity today for a couple of different reasons. The notice of funding availability for our Continuum of Care funds, about $1.3 million that we manage on behalf of the community, was announced on July 3rd. There are some interesting twists to the announcement this year that I'll go into a little bit more detail on. But also, I want to give some kudos to Paul's leadership with some internal discussions that he and Sam and I have had. It's been an opportunity for Jonathan and I to kind of get refocused on our primary role in being the community manager for this particular pot of funding. And over the course of time, since the passage of the Homeless Emergency Assistance and Rapid Transitions to Housing Act, the HARTH Act, which passed in 2009, over the course of time, HUD has really focused a lot of attention on the system performance measures. And over the course of the last 10 years, it's increased a little bit every year. And this year, for the first time, we're beginning to see particular quantitative improvements that they want to see on each of the measures that we'll talk about here today. We're looking backwards today on our data from the last year or two, but we know kind of what to expect with this year's application, so there are some changes. So basically, what we have here, the system performance measures are, they're a set of standard measures that the Department of Housing and Urban Development uses to monitor how communities are holistically addressing homelessness. And it's not just Continuum of Care funded agencies, it's what the system as a whole is doing. So it involves every type of provision of service to folks who are experiencing homelessness in the community. So we look at first-time homeless, we look at exits to permanent housing, we look at the length of time people spend homeless, we look at once people get housed, are they accessing income through employment or other non-cash benefits? Once they get housed, we want to make sure that they stay housed and don't return to become homeless again. And then this all leads to what we talked about the last time I was here, which is that point-in-time measure, that total number of people who are experiencing homelessness. These are all very interrelated, and so we'll kind of go through that here today. So we came up with an acronym. Yes, it's FLIRT. So first-time homeless, length-of-time homeless, exits to housing, returns to homelessness, and then the total number of people who are homeless. So the data that we have, obviously it comes from our homeless management information system. It's only HMIS agencies and clients that are counted. We've talked before about the fact that we have some gaps in data because we have certain providers in the community that aren't inputting data into our HMIS. So the data is what we have. We look back at 2 years of contextual data that actually look at the federal fiscal year. So the data that we're looking at today goes back to, it wraps up on September 30th of last year. So not the most current data, but it's the data that we have. So.
And Brian, just a question on that. So does the does the federal program require us to rely only on HMIS? Or could we, since we maybe know who those partners are who aren't inputting data in, do we have a way to include their data even though it's not in the system? Or are we allowed to do that?
We're not really allowed to do that. There are ways to import data from other systems. There are capacity issues, I think. That's probably a longer discussion. So here we have a little chart here that talks about each of these items. So first time exits from homelessness, returns from homelessness, and then the length of time that people spend homeless in the community. Increase in first-time homelessness is obviously going to make the number of people experiencing homelessness increase, obviously. So, you know, if we can get people exits to permanent housing, that decreases the number. More returns to homelessness is going to have an increase in the total number of people experiencing homelessness. Increase in length of time homeless. This is the one point, we'll get to the data on this in a minute, but we had a substantial jump in the average amount of time people spend homeless in the community. So length of time homeless. Obviously, we want to see a reduction in the average and median length of time that people remain homeless. We went this year, an average, last year, about 145 days for folks who are in shelter and transitional housing to an average of 178 days. And a slight increase from people who are coming just solely from emergency shelter. The way HUD gives us this report, it's a little persnickety. So the dark bar combines both shelter and transitional housing, and the light bar is just the emergency shelter. But we had an increase in both counts. And there's two things about this that I want to make sure everyone understands. It's partially a product of we just simply don't have enough units that we can get people into fast enough, and we don't have the rental subsidies for people who need permanent supportive housing. And we have a lot of people, as we saw with the point-in-time numbers, by virtue of that, who are aging into chronically homeless status simply because they're out there for so long. So exits to housing, we want to see successful placement and retention in housing. We want to see increases in percentage of the people who exit to permanent housing. So again, you know, coordinated entry, rapid rehousing, permanent supportive housing. So our exits to housing. So if you look at the combined numbers of people who are coming out of shelter and transitional housing, basically about 50% of that population getting into permanent housing. The dark bar, the 98% bar, you have people that are in permanent supportive housing. If they exit, they're going into other permanent housing options. Sometimes they're able to go live independently, but 98% of the people who exit permanent supportive housing are going to successful housing placements elsewhere. But for folks who are still in transitional housing or in shelter situations, only about 50% of those are actually getting into or exiting to permanent housing placements.
And you're saying 50, but I'm seeing 60.
Yeah, if you combine the two, average the two numbers. Okay. So our returns to homelessness, basically about 1 in 5 people that get housed return to being homeless sometime over the course of 24 months. We have some projects that are more successful than others. The Woodfin that Homeward Bound operates, they've had no returns to homelessness. They've had some people who have died or gone on to assisted living, but that's a very, very intensive, focused site, supportive services available there. We have to do a lot of scattered site housing, and that's just a little bit more difficult to do for folks that...
So this is, just so I understand,
Yep.
We want this number to be low, right?
We want this number to be
So
low.
this year, 2018 was better than 2017.
That's correct. We did make an improvement there,
Okay.
which is
And
good.
Actually, can you flip back 2 slides? I want to put a point.
Let's see here.
I think that was, it was the moving into permanent, that.
Yeah. Up. Sorry here. The clicker's not going in the direction I want it to.
Maybe just use the arrows.
Yeah.
Yeah, it took you backwards. There, okay. So we did a little, well, again, we want these numbers to be high, right?
That's correct.
Okay.
Yep. Mhm.
So we're maybe not quite as good as last year, but not too terribly less.
Yeah.
Okay.
And, with the street outreach, 37% of people that are engaged by our PATH team getting into housing, I mean, those are typically our highest needs folks. Are going to have the most significant barriers to housing placement. So that's part of the reason why that number is so low. And then again, the lack of subsidy in units.
Right. So I'm just looking at the trend. That number is going down pretty significantly.
Yep. Mhm.
And that's, again, supply and subsidies.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep. Okay, so we want to see people stay housed. Again, roughly 1 in 5 are returning within 2 years.
And how does that compare what's a fair comparison? National level?
National level, we're on par nationally. Yeah, it's still a higher percentage than we'd like to see. Just on this particular measure, HUD is asking to see a 5% decrease in that number year over year now.
Good grief.
Yes, yeah. And of course, we want to see the total number of people who experience homelessness go down. These factors all work together. The point in time, as we've said, it's a snapshot, it's one night in time, vastly different the day before or the day after. One thing we can look at, though, is the number of people who are in our HMIS, Homeless Management Information System. That number's gone down. It's a little deceiving because there's some data that we used to have reported into HMIS that we don't currently have in there, in particular the Veterans Affairs Supportive Housing. There was just a glitch in who was going to be responsible for entering that data. We're working with the VA to shore that back up. So I think we'll be able to get that number increased. But we see just a little decrease of entries into HMIS, but we did see about a 4.5% decrease in our point in time count this year. This is another thing where HUD wants to see a 5% decrease year over year on point in time data going forward. So what does all this tell us? So small decrease in first-time homelessness. Length of time homelessness is steadily increasing. Our exits to permanent housing, roughly static, and then 15 to 20% returning to homelessness once they've been housed. That's about average for national stats.
What are some of the top reasons people return to homelessness?
I think it's a variety of things, probably behavioral issues with some folks, lack of ability to pay their share of the rent sometimes. I mean, it's all the typical things one would expect. So, I mean, it's a complicated population. We have a pretty willing group of some landlords in the city that are willing to rent to folks, but they have their levels of tolerance for non-payment, for behavioral issues, and sometimes they have to act.
And is there a transition plan for those who are in permanent supportive housing?
For those who are in permanent supportive housing to move them on.
Alternative housing?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, there are, policies that we have in place if someone can move into, Mountain Housing Opportunities property or move into, something with the housing authority where they're not going to require the intensive case management.
Each family has a separate plan?
Yeah. So, that's part of the case planning that, Homeward Bound is doing the vast majority of this work. They work with each individual placement to see what the options are long-term. Truth of the matter is, a lot of folks that are in permanent supportive housing, that's going to be their option. Yeah. But there are situations where people can move on from that. So, and whenever we can make that happen, I think that's a huge victory for the community and certainly a huge victory for those individuals and families too.
So we need to be thinking about not just, again, increasing the supply of affordable housing, but also increasing the supply of permanent supportive housing?
Permanent supportive housing and the subsidy that goes with it. Right now, the continuum of care funds that we have, that $1.3 million, it's really the only resource that the community has for rental assistance and supportive services for permanent supportive housing in the community. It's the only resource we have. And, those units stay filled up. And the little bit of attrition that there is typically when somebody passes on or has to move into, an assisted living facility because they're no longer capable of living independently. So, and that 1.3 million doesn't go a long way. So, yeah. So also want to see, increases in income through cash and non-cash sources. Why does all this matter? Well, HUD is determined, as have a lot of funders, that what gets measured gets done. And I think that's just a trend we see, across the philanthropic world. System performance matters in particular really help us understand both program impact and then the community decisions that we're making. And there's, people, I see eyes glaze over in meetings when I start talking about system performance measures, but it's what HUD tells us we have to do. And until we find a way to supplant that $1.3 million, it's kind of the deck of cards that we've got to play. And it comes with a lot of strings attached, and it's complicated funding to deal with. But HUD is really getting serious about measuring this stuff. And like I said, this is the first time, this is my 24th year being involved in continuum of care related stuff. This is the first time I've ever seen where they've said, we want to see specific percentage increases and decreases in this. And we knew it was coming, but all Jonathan and I do, the analogy we've come up with is we're kind of the air traffic controllers on this stuff. We're making sure that the planes don't crash into each other, the agencies that are working together, there's little duplication of services, that they don't run into the ground, that they're all headed in the same direction, which I think the agreement in the community is that we want to make homelessness rare, brief, and non-recurring, effectively ending it. And so by virtue of the fact that we have that visibility in that high place as the air traffic controllers, it's easy to shoot at us a lot. So we have to take some hits on some stuff, and that's just part of it. So, but looking at these measures and how they work together enables us to make better decisions as a community, how we can improve those each points of measurement. So.
Is there either a carrot or a stick that HUD is offering, depending on whether we meet or don't meet the performance measures?
The carrot would be increased funding. The stick would be a loss of funding. And my back of the envelope calculations this year, looking at our system performance and where we were last year and what the scores are, we're looking at about an 18-point hit on our consolidated application this year, which is the portion that Jonathan and I write to support the community applications. And that's just my back of the envelope looking at what the scoring matrix is this year. So it could be even more points.
On another note, just out of curiosity, is there any numbers out there on mental health needs of the homeless population here?
I mean, I think there's significant needs. I think around 30% of the folks that are out there have some severe and persistent mental illness. Our PATH outreach team is targeted to work with those folks who have specific mental health diagnoses. I think they do a very effective job. Our community mental health system, I don't know of any community that has a really great community-based mental health system to deal with our homeless population. I think we have some good agencies doing good work here. Is there a need for more and more intensive care? Yes. So, having dealt with a lot of philanthropies as being a grant writer and other roles and serving on the board of a foundation now, everybody wants clearly defined goals. They want evidence and data-informed plans to achieve those goals. They want to see that agencies have capacity to implement strategies. They want to be able to monitor progress, and they want to be able to provide for some evaluation of what the ultimate success is. So I think you're seeing the philanthropic world align with some of these same performance measures when it comes to homelessness. And some conversations I've had with foundations recently is that they're starting to look at these HUD measures as they evaluate applicants that come to them for programs related to homelessness. So. Data-driven is an ongoing process. This is something we just have to look at on an ongoing basis. HIAC, we're trying to drive them to look at these measurements on a more regular basis, not just once a year, stuff that we need to have a dashboard to monitor all the time. And again, this is not just continuum of care funding. They're looking at our community response to homelessness. So, questions, other questions?
So I guess my question is, if the funds are at risk, if the performance measures are not going in the right direction, I guess, my question to you and to HIAC is, what else can the city do? So, and I don't necessarily expect you to answer that right now, but, we're certainly I feel like we're doing a lot on the increasing the supply. I mean, we need to get our policy in place so we can get our projects moving, and I don't know what the timing is on that, but we got to do that. But there's funding available for new construction. There's that's happening. It seems like one place that we're not that we could do more is on the subsidies, is expanding that pot of 1.3 million.
Yes.
That's, again, that just becomes general fund dollars that compete with every other request for general fund dollars. But
Yes.
I hope that, we should tee that up as to be part of the budget discussions for next year.
Yeah, that would be really helpful. Our local numbers, I asked Homeward Bound to give me an accounting recently of what does it cost to provide permanent supportive housing, all the supportive services and rental subsidy and management of the grants and everything. What's the per person per year cost? And it's about $18,000 a year. But when you compare that to the cost
So
of
small.
yeah, locking people up, hospitalizing them, it's small and it's doable. Right now we have about 210 people on our homeless by name list, which is the list of the people who are the most vulnerable homeless folks in our community, folks that are unsheltered, who have been homeless the longest, who have the most frequent interactions with law enforcement, most frequent hospitalizations and ER visits. There's a cost to benefit analysis there that, again, I think that the cost of providing the rental subsidies and the supportive services is far less than the cost we would incur as a community to leave people on the streets. And then to mention, housing is the answer. If somebody's housed, they're not homeless anymore, and it's the most decent thing and humane thing that we can do as a community.
Right.
Yeah.
And if we expanded that pool of dollars, are the units, so there are two aspects to permanent affordable housing.
There are.
There's the supply of housing, and then there's the subsidies to help people stay there.
Correct.
If we expand the dollars, are there other people that would come into that program?
I don't know. I think so. There are a limited pool of landlords willing to rent to folks who are coming off the streets. There's some other things that I think a step forward was that in the land use incentive grant policy that we incorporated some points to take people who are off the by name list who have rental subsidies. That's something that was included. That's a huge step in the right direction. I think it would be great for the Home Consortium to look at, okay, if we're going to put some dollars into your project, the qualified allocation plan, there's sometimes some points that are given if you're taking people who are coming off the streets, but the resident selection criteria of the property management firms are sometimes so stringent that eliminates about 97% of all homeless people. But if we could, with our home dollars that we're putting into projects, if we could put some teeth into that and say, hey, we really need you to take some folks off our by name list. If we could perhaps examine policies along those lines, provide incentives for people to be able to do this. It's I will stipulate that it's a hard population to serve and to house. And having worked for a housing developer and manager that pretty much all we did was house people who had previously been homeless, I've seen firsthand that it's a difficult thing to do. I'd also stipulate that there's a lot of market-based rental folks that cause a lot of problems too. So I think with the right supportive services, my friend Kirby Davis at First Management in Nashville, who stepped up as a private property manager and offered to 1% of the units in his inventory to be available to folks coming off the streets. He'll tell you firsthand that basically once they get moved in, they have a chance to get settled in and clean up a little bit. I can't tell them from any other tenant in any one of my properties. So I think there's ways to make it succeed.
So maybe, I mean, Paul, as AHAC is talking about incentives, maybe, I don't know if there's incentives and then more incentives for landlords who, again, might be willing to take folks directly out of homelessness. I don't know.
We have it on the new Luigi as I think it's 2 years of property tax abatement that for taking somebody off the homeless by name list, and we can add to it, but it was something we're working with Brian that we thought was a need to try to connect all of these things as incentives to landlords and developers.
Right, yeah, so if that can just, that theme can kind of continue through the,
Yeah.
these new conversations about existing rental housing.
Yeah, absolutely. And also want to give some kudos to our CAPE folks who have been working with Jonathan and I on some new communications pieces here and a strategy to communicate both internally and externally what it is that Jonathan and I do. I think there's been a lot of mystery about it. And so, and I've been here almost a year now. I'm not sure I've done a great job of communicating what our primary responsibilities are. So this kind of explains a little bit of that. And Sam and I are working to get with department directors soon to meet with them and just kind of give them an overview of here's what city's actually doing. And again, it's more, coordination, promotion of collaboration and monitoring how we're doing as a community and encouraging us to find better ways to do more. So, yeah, but I appreciate the opportunity to be here this morning. Other questions? Yeah, great. I'll leave some.
Thanks, Brian. Thank you. All right, with that, I think we're moving into public comment. Do we have any public comment? Yes, Nicole, she always saves us from deafening silence.
Hi, everyone. I'm Nicole Heimba. I'm with Bountiful Cities. I also serve on the board of directors of the Asheville-Buncombe Community Land Trust. Around 2 months ago at the HCD committee meeting, you all had asked what can we do to move the process of developing the ABCLT along more quickly so that we're able to start stewarding properties as quickly as possible. I took that question back to the board of directors, and it's unanimous. What will move us along the most quickly is to actually be able to hire staff. Because, of course, we are a volunteer, an all-volunteer board of directors doing this work. And so I just wanted to let you all know that we are now in the process of, we have a hiring committee developed in order to plan out all the hiring policies, and we have actually already passed a compensation package, benefits package. So we are on our way to being able to actually begin to hire staffing for the Community Land Trust. A timeline, I don't want to give any kind of a misfactual estimate right now because we're in the beginning stages of that, but I would hope that we would be able to have somebody hired within the next few months. And so that is going to move us along, and we appreciate all the support that the city has provided in the past, and we look forward to partnering in the future.
And so, Nicole, are you suggesting that so the grant funding that the Community Land Trust has gotten, is that sufficient at this point to support a staff person?
The grant funding that we have so far can support some overhead expenses of the organization. It is not sufficient yet to support the salary costs of an executive director full-time. And so that is something that we'll be working with potentially the city and maybe other funders as well to see what we can put together as quickly as possible, because that is definitely the next and missing step to begin to steward properties. We can't steward properties with an all-volunteer board.
You all determine the cost for hiring staff?
We have. We've just passed a compensation package at our last Asheville-Buncombe Community Land Trust meeting. And so the initial kind of starting salary we're looking at is about $65,000. With benefits, it comes out to the $85,000, $87,000 range for full-time for 1 year.
And so what, this is sort of looking at Kathy and Paul, I mean, so the bond money cannot be used for salaries. So if the city were to put money toward this to help it happen, it would be a budget amendment. We would need to find it, right?
It would be, and it would need to be ongoing money.
Right.
So the money that we have, like in Housing Trust Fund, is capital, and typically we would not look to capital to be able to do that. So we would need to find it within the operating budget.
And who's working on this? Who's, yeah.
Yeah, I have not heard that we received a proposal. Go ahead.
We have not yet submitted a proposal. We do have a team at the Land Trust that is developing a proposal for the city. The proposal, firstly, is really a proposal for how we plan to draw down the bond funds, how we plan to spend those bond funds. We've been doing a lot of planning and research and development into that. But also, we would like to propose some support for the salary of the executive director as
So
well.
that is coming to us.
We're working on it now.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Anyone else for public comment? Nope. I know there are other members of the public here. You sure you don't want to come talk to us? Okay, great. Well, then we are adjourned. Thanks.